Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 8th episode of Yeshiva League Pass Faceoff. I'm your host, Josh Kass. And before we begin, we're going to start by mentioning our sponsor, and that's the YLP Law Firm. For 16 years, you've entrusted Elliot with the growth and guidance of your kids. And now it's time to let him do the same for your family's most important asset, your home. Admitted in both New York and New Jersey, Elliot can help guide you through any residential or commercial purchase, sale, refinance, or lease with championship quality and award-winning care. If you're looking for your commercial coach or a new home is your goal, please reach out to the Weiselberg Law Real Estate Services today at 917-952-2597, or you can email them at wiselawsk@gmail.com. Reminding everybody once again, that's the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely. So here we are back in action again, and the JV Awards just came out. And with that being said, we're moving on to the varsity side of things right now. So this episode is going to be our Varsity Awards show. And again, very similar to the JV episode, and as well as last year, the way things worked is that, again, panel of coaches voted on the awards that we have. JV is a smaller league than varsity this year, so we didn't have the honorable mentions and the things for multiple divisions like we did last year. However, in the varsity league, it being a much bigger league, so we do have honorable mentions, and let's get right to it. Without further ado, we're going to start again with our first team all. Let's just go over the awards again to remind all the viewers. So again, we have the MVP. Obviously, we have the first all-team offense, first all-team defense, first all-team goalie. I guess just to put it into shorter terms, we have a first all-team, a second all-team, and for varsity, because the league is that much bigger than JV, we actually have a third all-team this year, something we did not have last year. We just went straight to honorable mentions, but the league's so much bigger this year that we decided that, it was really fitting, with all of the votes that, a third all-team was, we thought fitting. And in addition to the third all-team, we also do have some honorable mentions for those that fell just a little bit short in the votes. However, we're up there, and obviously we would like to shout out their accomplishments. And with that being said, we also, again, have the breakout player, except this time we actually have a breakout player from the East and a breakout player from the West in varsity. And that's not something we had because we didn't have two conferences in JV. And we also have our Mensch/Sportsmanship Award, as well as the Beitler Award. So with that being said, let's get right to it. As I mentioned, we're going to start with the first all-team offense, and I'm going to cut to the chase like never before. The first spot of first all-team offense, this is an individual who won an award last year, and it is Aiden Rausman. Aiden Rausman, a junior on the TABC Storm this year, led them in scoring and was one of the top scorers in the league. He was a super impactful player. Everyone knows that he is obviously a bigger guy. However, he still has all the attributes to be a phenomenal player and has been a phenomenal player his entire time. He had a JV championship, won co-championship MVP with Shia Forgash last year after he scored the overtime winning goal against DRS. And this year, although TABC fell just a little short and lost in the championship to DRS, he was absolutely phenomenal. He had a hat trick, and he was asking me after it happened, this was in the semifinal game, he asked me what the quickest playoff hat trick ever scored in Yeshiva League history was. I had no idea, but I think he completed his in under 5 minutes or just around 5 minutes, something like that. So that being said, this is a guy who could do it all. He's got a little bit of speed for a bigger guy. A lot of people really underrate that when you have a taller guy who can, really run. But he is one of those guys who really is an exception. His hand-eye coordination is phenomenal. His stick handling is incredible. He knows how to score, knows how to set people up. He makes everyone around him better. And he kills penalties too. He can play the power play, quarterback the power play as an offenseman. Really just shows his versatility as well. And with that being said, congratulations to Aiden Rausman on getting one of the two spots in the first all-team offenseman positions. However, the second one is going to a player who I don't believe won an award straight up. I think if I remember correctly, it was an honorable mention last year, and that's going to another junior in Elia Yitzhaki. Elia Yitzhaki last year played varsity, and in his 9th grade year played varsity. He's only gotten better year after year, and this is the first year, if you caught our season recap last year, we said, going to be interesting to see what happens with Elia Yitzhaki going forward, and a number of these Hank players in his age going forward, because of the fact that they've now played varsity for 2 straight years against players who have probably been a little bit better talent-wise than the ones that they're going to face their own age. And not a knock on anyone, just saying that when you're playing against that type of competition, instead of kids your own age, when you're 2 years younger, 3 years younger than them, and you're still producing at the level that YLP Faceoff was producing at, it's a huge, huge accomplishment. And it wasn't a surprise when he really took the league when he took it by storm this season. He was absolutely incredible. Again, he was a big part of leading Hank to the semifinals, where they did fall short to TABC. However, successful year for them, and they should certainly be back in the mix next year. He still has another year left to do it. He's only gotten better. The debate was whether or not he could score over 100 goals in his Yeshiva League high school career by the time he's done, because he's only played varsity, and he has consistently been able to score goals like really just whenever he wants. He has been nearly unstoppable at every single stage of his playing career, whether it be in middle school, even as a fifth and a sixth grader, all the way through his, obviously right now, his junior year, when he is being nominated for one of these two first all-team offenseman positions. So congratulations, Elia. And congratulations to Aiden Rousman and YLP Hockey taking home our first all-team offenseman awards. The first all-team defenseman awards we move on to, and we're going to start with mentioning one from TABC, as we simply had, we just had Aiden Rousman mentioned on the offensive side of things. We have Simon on the defensive side of things. He won one of the awards last year for first all-team defense in the JV level, and no surprise that it's translated here to the varsity level, and he can do it all. Very similarly to Aiden Rousman, he's versatile. He can play the offensive position. He can play the defensive position. He is elite defensively. He brings elite reading the play, as I mentioned. So I guess you're going to say that his elite sense to the game. As I mentioned, his offense is going to come at times. He knows how to create offense from making defensive plays. Similarly to how I talked about it in the JV episode, guys like Josh Lampert and Zevi Fuchs, though, those guys didn't get too caught up in making the play offensively whenever they had the opportunity, because they still had that sense for where to be defensively as well. And Simon, a very similar situation. I know I've said that a bunch of times, and anyone who's watched both of these episodes will probably have heard me say that a bunch of times by the time they're done watching both or listening to both. But with that being said, Simon, phenomenal defenseman, and he's only a junior. He still has another year left to do this, and it would not surprise me if he was nominated again next year, but we obviously got to get there first. So congratulations to Simon winning one of our first all-team defenseman awards. And the second of the two first all-team defenseman awards that we have is going to Nathaniel Lawrence of the DRS Wildcats. And again, I mentioned this in the JV episode, so I'll mention it again in the varsity episode, that the order that I am saying and revealing these awards, it was not an order of who got the first spot and who got the second spot. It's just like one spot, the second spot. It wasn't in order of who had more votes or anything like that. So with that being said, just wanted to clear that up. Anyway, back to the first all-team defenseman, the second spot again, Nathaniel Lawrence. So congratulations to him. And I don't believe he was nominated for one last year. It's possible, maybe if I remember correctly, maybe he got an honorable mention, but anyone who knew about what we could expect to see from this varsity league and the top players to be around in the league, everyone knew Nathaniel Lawrence was going to be right there at the top. And if he wasn't going to be number one solely, he was certainly going to be one of the players who was considered to be number one in the league. 2 years ago, he scored just about every single goal for DRS in their JV season en route to a championship there. And this year, he really changed his game. You didn't see him bringing the ball up every single time and shooting every single opportunity he had with the ball. He played a lot more of a defensive defenseman style. But with that being said, his offense has always been a huge part of his game, was always able to make the impact, played the side on the power play as well as the points. So he was able to really also, similar to the way I mentioned with Simon and Rousman, those guys, he brought a little bit of versatility as well. His shot, I would say, was probably the best wrist shot specifically, because he never really winded up. And that was something very interesting to see. Although it has, it's been a common theme before amongst certain players and amongst players just in general, not wanting to take slap shots, especially defensemen. But unique again that, here's a guy who has so much time, probably the best shot in the league when he puts it all together, and just never wanted to take slap shots, which is an interesting take, but it clearly proved itself to be the right choice, because guy walks off the floor with 2 championships in his Yeshiva League career, one in 10th grade, one in 12th grade, and just a phenomenal, not just career as a whole, but especially this season, he's being nominated for this award. Great way to walk out of your senior year. And again, congratulations to Nathaniel Lawrence on winning the second position of the first all-team defenseman awards, as well as R.A. Simon for winning the other one. On to the first all-team goalie, and this was a tough decision because the goaltenders in this year's Varsity League had a lot of depth at the position, and it was so close. It was really just splitting hairs at this point that had one individual over another. And honestly, within all 3 all teams, all of these goalies had splitting hairs between each other. There's an argument to be made that all of them could have been number 1. There's an argument for them to be made, the ones that fell into second and third place, that the person who fell into third could have been second. The person in second could have maybe been in third. And, obviously it's unfortunate that some people do get ranked a little bit lower than others, or voted, I guess, a little bit lower than others in this case. But with that being said, certainly no shame to anyone who ends up with an award by the end of the show. But without further ado, the first all-team goalie position went to Rami Kessock of the Rambam Ravens. And for me personally, I think that this is again, one of really like a 1A, 1B, even 1C type thing, where all 3 of these goalies could have potentially been in the 1 spot, who are going to be on all of these all teams, as you guys will see once we reveal the other ones. But again, I mean, if you took Rami Kessock off this Rambam team, and I think for me, this is really where I sort of understand why he ended up with more of the votes. Not saying that if you didn't do this with the other goalies not saying if you did this with the other goalies that, the situation wouldn't really change, but I think it'd be the most impactful where if you took Rami Kessock off that Rambam Ravens team, they don't touch the playoffs. They don't come close to competing for the playoffs. He was the brick wall and net for them, the backbone for their team that gave them a chance just about every game. And even in games where they wouldn't exactly, end up with the win column, but they'd play close, he'd be a big reason why. And in games where they could have been blown out, by 10 or more goals and only lose by 3 or 4, he'd also be a big reason why. And it would make things look a little bit better, overall total result wise, even though maybe, if you're going to look at the strategy and the tactics that ended up not really working in their favor, he made a lot of it a little bit better for them. And by a little bit, he made a lot of it a lot better for them, or look a lot better for them. And I definitely would have to agree with the fact that, for the guys who voted him here, that if you took him off that Rambam team, they would not nearly be as good as they were. However, with that being said, it's still nothing against any of the other goalies that ended up winning awards here. And certainly the argument to be made for the other 2 as well, who will be on the second and third all teams, as I mentioned. But for now, congratulations to Rami Kessock on winning his first all-team goalie. And also, just as I mentioned, we're talking about the previous awards. If any of these players have won, Rami Kessock did win the first all-team goalie position award last year on the JV level. So congrats to him. And congrats to all of the first all-team offensemen, defensemen, and goaltenders. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the second all-team. So the second all-team, we'll start with the offense again, is we're going to begin with a player from a team who we have not yet mentioned, and that's going to be David Rosen of the Frisch Cougars. David Rosen was a guy who had never played Yeshiva League hockey before, not in high school at least. And I'm not sure about middle school either, but at least to my knowledge, did not play in high school. Had, all of the guys who are seniors this year had their 9th grade year taken away because of the COVID pandemic. But with that being said, they did have a 10th and 11th and 12th grade. And David Rosen did not elect to play in 10th and 11th grade. He was playing ice hockey instead, but he was able to make the transition to come and play both this year. And he was a huge piece to their team. He scored big goal after big goal. He was very, very huge for Frisch on the power play, especially. We know they like to play that diamond. He was in the one-time spot on the left side. That right-handed shot gives you your onside, so to speak, with the one-timers, and he was there as a huge piece of it. He scored big goal after big goal. He was huge for them all season long, and I've said that a couple times already, but really showed that he really helped Frisch get over a big hump this year, because people didn't know if this team was going to be able to really piece everything they had together after falling short on the JV level 2 years ago, when they started to have those glimpses of, great play, but couldn't quite sustain that. And, their goaltending was a little bit of a question mark, and their offense couldn't be consistent enough. Their defense was actually quite strong. Problem was that, ironically enough, for that Frisch team, they didn't have so much depth, or playing depth at least. And, guys, as I mentioned, David Rosen obviously right now is the center of attention, but also guys on the back end, Eitan Fine and Max Levy, who came along and really helped this team. Well, Fine also from last year, but, really they came along and they helped really balance out this Frisch team. But the guy who really pulled it all together offensively and was a huge piece for them on the scoring chart was David Rosen. So congratulations to him on winning the first of the second all-team offenseman position awards, and the second offenseman on the second all-team offense goes to Matis Kraus. And Matis Kraus is, again, a name that many of us, if not all of us, are quite familiar with, who was a huge piece for TABC on last year's varsity team, played on the second line with Shea Fields. And again, this is a guy who, similarly, we've mentioned in JV how there were players who converted from offense to defense, defense to offense. Matis Kraus is one of those guys who converted from defense to offense. He played defense in 10th grade on that TABC team that made it to the championship, and then made the transition to play offense. He was really more of an offenseman as a player, but made the transition into, or rather played defense in 10th grade, really because they needed to balance out the lines, didn't have as many defensemen. Once Ethan Moskoff transferred over, he was able to come back to offense because Moskoff transferring gave them a position, or gave them another option at position, another very, very strong, reliable option for a defenseman, which allowed Kraus to transition back to offense and really focus on his strengths, which is scoring and making plays and setting up goals and all of that stuff. And again, phenomenal player. He, really worked hard over the summer. I was with him in Camp David, just watching him go at, and he told me that his goal at Camp David was to win MVP. This is a guy who wanted to set goals, and by win MVP, he meant win MVP in Camp David. He came into this league wanting, he set certain goals and wanting to accomplish those goals, and I'm sure that the championship was at the top of the list. And unfortunately, while he didn't get it, I think it's fitting that he's on at the very least, one of these three teams, one of these all teams, as a name who's gotten mentioned, who's clearly earned everything that he has worked for. And honestly, there's a huge argument to be made that he certainly deserves more than what he has, but unfortunately, not everyone can win it all. However, it was certainly a very, very outstanding career for him, and congratulations to him as well as David Rosen on winning our second all-team offensive awards. With that being said, on to the second all-team defenseman awards, and we're going to start with Jake Frankel. So Jake Frankel, one of the line mates of Nathaniel Lawrence over at DRS, and a guy who did not get close to being nominated for any of the awards last year. I think that this is really a huge jump for him. Although, at least, well, let me rephrase that. On paper, it may be. I personally, as well as many others, know that last year, that DRS team was loaded defensively, and that was really their strength. And even Nathaniel Lawrence had a tough time breaking into that rotation of guys who played on that defensive unit for Larry Gross's team last year on the varsity level. So it wasn't really such a surprise to see that Jake Frankel was sort of the odd man out, because he was they rotated 6 defensemen. He was the 7th guy in on occasion for them, but, really just not a lot of consistent playing time. But Larry Gross knew, and everyone else around the league knew, that Jake Frankel was going to be the key piece that was going to come together with Nathaniel Lawrence after they played together in their 10th grade year and shut just about everyone down. And, really a big part of that DRS suffocating defense, as we mentioned. Obviously, there were some other names, and some of them may even be on here, as you'll find out soon. However, it's really tough to get past what this DRS defense did, and it's really tough to not acknowledge the work that Jake Frankel put in and not acknowledge the role he played on this defensive team. And it was just a really incredible season for him. He caps it off with a championship similar to his line mate, Nathaniel Lawrence. So congratulations to Jake Frankel on getting one of the second all-team defenseman positions. And the second one is going to Jacob Weiss of the Frisch Cougars. And we're starting to see that trend of Frisch players get in here a little bit more, really after not knowing what they were going to get out of this year. But Jacob Weiss is a player who worked on his game all summer long. I had an opportunity to work with him a little bit there and see really where he was trying to get in Camp Missouri this past summer. And he was absolutely outstanding And really the work he put in, I mean, the guy was playing hockey every second in Camp David. He decided to take a stab at it this year and really grew his game, getting some experience against the rest of the league players he might not necessarily see as often, but still obviously you benefit from playing against really everyone around the league, no matter what schools they play for. And all, no matter how high or low their skill levels may be, you're really getting the full scope. And he decided he wanted to do that, put the work in, and worked his way up to being a captain this past year in Frisch after being a guy who was sort of just really also similar to Jake Frankel the year before, sort of the seventh defenseman. And I think he saw a little bit more time on Frisch's team than Jake Frankel did for DRS because Frisch did have some injuries last year. Remember, Ellie Knapp and Ari Levinson were out for a couple games. So he hopped into the mix and got some adequate playing time. However, by the time both of those guys came back in Knapp and Levinson, the door sort of closed a little bit more for Weiss, and he didn't really get that opportunity down the stretch until maybe the championship game when I think they just wanted to keep bodies a little bit more fresh. However, it did end up working out for him. He had a phenomenal senior year. He was a big piece to this Frisch team, and although they fell a little bit short, they were right there with DRS in the semis, could have very well been in the championship if not for maybe one or two bounces, maybe a missed call potentially. I'm just like listing all the theoreticals that could, potentially lead to one goal, one bounce, one slight change in direction or something. You never know. And although he didn't win a championship, and although Frisch did not win the championship, I think it's fitting that we see Jacob Weiss on here was certainly one of the more underrated players as a whole, not just as defensemen in this league this past year on the varsity level. Anyway, we're going to move on to the second all-team goaltending position. And again, congratulations to all of our second all-team award nominees, both offensemen and defensemen, Matis Kraus, David Rosen, Jacob Weiss, and Jake Frankel. Second all-team goalie, and again, I know I said they were splitting hairs, and I will continue to repeat that until we're through with it. Second all-team goalie position goes to Max Newmark of the Hafter Hawks. And very similar to Rami Kesak, we as the voters, everyone who was involved really came to the agreement and to the belief that very similarly to Rami Kesak, who by a hair we decide because Hafter has a few more pieces than Rambam does. If you took Max Newmark off of that Hafter team, they would be a drastically different team. The real difference was the fact that at least for what I would have considered it, would have been that if you took Max Newmark off Hafter versus Rami Kesak off of Rambam, that Hafter might have another defenseman, another offenseman here and there who can carry the load and really help the situations, not having their top goaltender in net, as opposed to Rambam, where if you take, Rami Kesak out of net, you're in for probably a much easier night scoring on them because they don't have the depth that Hafter did. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the rest of that. It's just sort of really, at least where I would have considered the differences being. But it's certainly not a shame. Max Newmark, outstanding season. He basically stole that game against DRS. I think that's certainly the highlight of the year for him, no matter what. He made highlight reel save after highlight reel save. And he's similarly to Kesak, a junior. And he has been lights out his entire Yeshiva League career, all the way back to when he started playing goalie in sixth grade. He's a converted offenseman. Everyone's got to remember that. And to see him continue to work at his game and grow and develop the way that he has, and he still has another year left to do it and wow us again. And next year, he's got a real shot at winning that championship. A lot of these guys do. The league's going to be a very competitive league next year, but a huge piece for it as a whole on this Hafter team. Obviously, I just hyped up next year a little bit, but for this past year, he was absolutely outstanding. Unfortunately for Hafter, they fell short in the quarterfinals against Frisch, and I couldn't watch that game because the live stream had cut out. I wasn't physically there as well, so I don't know exactly what happened, and I don't know if it was, a bounce or if it was just a bad day for Hafter or whatever, because I know Frisch did win that game 8-2, and that's really not what I expected. Certainly not what I expected going into that game. I was expecting a tight, low-scoring battle game. Expected Max Newmark to have a phenomenal game as he did. And you know what? I'm sure he still had a phenomenal game because it's just sometimes even the mighty fall. And he was, again, he made highlight reel save after highlight reel save. I don't remember how many times he made it onto Yeshiva League past top plays, but I'm sure it was more than most of the other goalies did. We've talked about it with how he stole that game from DRS and how he also, as I mentioned in the JV episode, how DRS had 3 consecutive shutouts to begin the season. He also put up consecutive shutouts to begin the season, and it's really the start to your season that can help set the tone down the stretch. And look, took that game from DRS in DRS. He had multiple shutouts, and he did it against the likes of all teams. He did it against a team in Rambam who had Zevi Herskowitz, one of the top goal scorers in the league. He did it against DRS, who had guys like Nathaniel Lawrence and Micha Khan, guys with lasers, on defense, and as well as their offense. Mention a couple names there, guys like Ben Ritter, Max Pokris, Itzi Uden, Jack Greenbaum. All of these guys who are absolutely lethal, really, from everywhere, and he found a way to hold them to 1 goal. And they were, as good as these teams he played were, he was just absolutely incredible all season long. So congratulations to Max Newmark on winning the second all-team goalie award. And we're now going to move on to our third all-team beginning with the offenseman. So again, congratulations to everyone who's won an award up until this point, both the first and the second all-team. And just to remind the second all-team entirely, it's Matis Kraus, David Rosen on offense, Jake Frankel, Jacob Weiss on defense, and Max Newmark in net. And we're going to move on to the third all-team. So the third all-team, and this is not something we did last year. We only had 2 full all-teams as well as some honorable mentions, both in JV and varsity, but we have a new entire third all-team this year on the varsity level at the very least, because JV was just not as big a league. And it begins with offenseman Asher Rudman. Asher Rudman is one of the most underrated players. I certainly would have said from this past year, and maybe not coming into it, but certainly by the way the Sting season, the SAR Sting season ended up playing out, certainly was a little bit more underrated than I think should have been. And he ended up with, game MVP in the championship last year. He was absolutely brilliant. He had 2 goals. And he as Elliot Weiselberg, when he was on the episode of the recap, said, he got the guys together and he said, let's go, boys, get on my back. I'm going to take you there. And that's exactly what happened. He had the 2 goals, which got the Sting within 1 and then tied the game within a matter of seconds against Frisch in the championship last year. He scored big goal after big goal again for them this year. And in a team where SAR really had a big drop off from what they were the previous years with the amount of depth and talent that they had. And not to say that they weren't a deep, talented team. They were, because they still made the playoffs and really found a recipe that allowed them to get back to the playoffs. Because 2 years ago, this team went 2-7-1 and they just went to the playoffs. So, other than the fact that obviously shout out to Jacob Schwartzman on another fantastic year coaching there. And he, again, is proving he can get the best out of his teams no matter who's on it. Asher Rudman played a huge part of that SAR Sting's offensive role this year. And congratulations to him, because last year he was not nominated for any of these awards. And I think it's fitting that, especially after having some of the performances he's had be overlooked, and really just this season as a whole, despite SAR not going as deep as they did the last year or two, that he gets on here. So congratulations to Asher Rudman. And the third all-team offensive position is going to Chaim Simon of the MTA Lions. I personally never got an opportunity to watch him play in person this season, but I have in seasons past. And I also have seen, now that MTA has more of a consistent live stream, what this kid can do, as well as many others who have played against him. And that's a reason, part of the reason why he was nominated. However, other than the fact that he is a very, very skilled individual player, and similar to how I've mentioned with other players, he is not exactly the biggest guy on the floor. He really makes it work for his size. He can do a little bit of everything. He can play defense, he can play offense, power play, penalty kill, early in the game, middle game, late in the game, scores goals, makes everyone around him better. And he is a real impact player, and he's only a junior. I think one of the most common denominators is you're seeing, I think, that we do have a good mix of 11th graders as well as 12th graders on this list. So it really just shows how deep this league was and how it can still continue to be this competitive and this deep going forward, maybe next year as well. Obviously, we won't know till we get there officially, as well as maybe students who transfer and whoever was playing ice hockey before that wasn't, as we mentioned in the case with David Rosen and Jacob Rosenstein on the JV episode for the awards. However, here it's, again, really just showing that the mix, and Chaim Simon, again, is a junior who still has another year left to do this and to wow everyone. And I'm sure that next year it's going to be even better for him. And I can't wait to see exactly what happens there. Moving on to the defensive side of things, the third all-team defense, these are two individuals who you guys might be familiar hearing their names. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that both of them were nominated on the JV level last year, so bit of a spoiler there. However, we're going to begin by mentioning the name of Jonathan Brothman, who is also a defenseman that was on the TABC Storm this past year. If I'm not mistaken, last year I believe he won a second all-team defenseman award on the JV level. I could be wrong. You guys can go back and watch and check for that. But again, really did it all. And again, this is a guy who can do it all really consistently. Not just he did it when he was asked to, he wanted to do it. Has the skill set of an offenseman, but plays defense, lockdown defense, and very similar to how I was comparing it with Moshe Kra in the JV episode, saying that, yes, he has the skill to play, but he uses his fundamentals first. He makes the fundamental play first, and the skill will take over when the skill takes over. That'll just come. But he doesn't go looking to make super skill plays and taking risks. He's a defense first player. He makes the right reads. He has great sense, and as I mentioned, he could do a little bit of everything, can play on the power play, can play on the penalty kill, can chip in offensively, knows when to join the rush, when not to join the rush, when to lay back a little bit more defensively, and also just excellent positioning on his end. He's a good communicator, something that a lot of these defensemen on this list do, but is something that's very slept upon, how much the value of using your voice and talking to your teammates and line mates in game and sort of communicating with them exactly what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, how quickly it needs to happen, all of those things, in game speed, which is not an easy skill to pick up. And it is a skill, is a big attribute that he's brought that many of the players on this list do have. However, it's a little bit more unique in the sense that, we're seeing it here. He's on the third all team. And with that being said, he's done so much of everything in the past. And because he really does a little bit of everything, I think it's very fitting that, again, he's on here. And he's also very similar to guys, as we've mentioned before, just like R.A. Simon, Chaim Simon, as well as Aiden Rousman. These guys, and Elliot Hockey, these guys are all juniors. And that being said, we're going to move on to the second of our third all-team defenseman awards. And that is going to another one from last year in Micha Khan. Micha Khan, I believe, was on the first all-team defensive awards list last year. So congratulations, and also congratulations to Jonathan Brothman for the first for being one of the nominees here. Micha Khan, though, back to him, very, very similar situation. Really played a lot of the heavy minutes this year that he also played last year. However, 2 years ago, as I mentioned, he wasn't really seeing that much time during the regular season. It wasn't really till down the stretch when DRS wanted to start finding more defensemen they could rotate in that he started getting some time. And he played a shift here and there in the last couple games, and he played a shift here and there in the semis and then the championship. And then last year was a huge piece for them en route to a championship run where they unfortunately fell short, but were right there with TABC and lost in overtime. And then this year they get over the hump. They beat TABC. He has a huge part in the game. And although he didn't score, he played lockdown defense in a game where they needed to against a very, very good TABC offense and overall team. And he was absolutely huge for them. He can do it all. He's got a laser beam for a shot, and this kid's not afraid to wind up, unlike some of his other teammates. He's got an absolute laser beam for a shot. He hits the net frequently, but he's also not a guy who, again, takes the risks, so to speak, that you see some of these defensemen who have a bit more upside trying to take because he wants to make the defensive play. And it's a very good attribute to have, and it's a huge piece of the game that makes teams successful, especially when you're playing lockdown defense. As I mentioned in the JV episode, defense comes first. Your defense will lead to offensive chances. Micha Khan does a great job of exemplifying that. So congratulations to him. Congratulations to all of our third all-team nominees, all for the first time, because we've never had a third all-team offense, defense, or goalie position. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the third all-team goalie before I forget. And the third all-team goalie, again, argument to be made. He could have been 2, could have been number 1. They all really were interchangeable. However, the third all-team goaltending position is going to Akiva Rotenberg of the Frisch Cougars, who is also a junior. And that's the common theme here. All of these goalies that we have on our first, second, and third all team. They are all juniors. It really just shows that the goaltending position is absolutely stacked. And you're going to hear as well in some of our honorable mentions as well, really the depth that is on this, that was in this league really is absolutely amazing to see. Makes the league obviously more competitive, but in addition to that, really shows what greatness we have ahead of us as well. So congratulations to Akiva Rotenberg on winning the third all-team goal. And just also, as I've mentioned, a bit about every player here, just to mention a little bit about him, came in as a junior 2 years ago. I don't remember why. I just remember that he wasn't playing on that JV team. And, if, they were really missing a goalie, like a strong starting goalie who could give them a chance against just about everyone. And with that being said, that's really where they fell short because they ran into Max Newmark in the first round. But last year, even though they didn't make the playoffs, they were right on the edge there. They had injuries during the regular season. They couldn't get there. But Akiva Rotenberg came and played last year on, as a 10th grader on the JV team, and he was absolutely outstanding. And everyone knew he was probably going to be the guy if he decided to play hockey in 11th grade as a goalie, that he was going to be the guy that Frisch was going to throw in net, and that was going to give his team a chance to win as often as they could. And that being said, that's exactly what happened. They go to the semifinals. They lose to DRS 2-1, and it was a brilliant, brilliant game. And although he falls a little bit short this year, if he's back on the team next year, and I'm not sure what the plans are, obviously, really for any of these guys. However, if he is on that team next year, that first team can be a dangerous team and probably should be a dangerous team going forward with all of these juniors in the class. I know that we haven't mentioned them all this year, but some of them won awards last year as well. You can go back and check that out from the JV Awards episode last year, or really it was all one episode last year. So go and check that out, and you'll find some of the other names on that list who can take this team farther next year, but it's going to start with Akiva Rotenberg. He was a huge piece for them this year, and I expect him to be a huge piece for them next year if he's in between the pipes. So congratulations to Akiva Rotenberg for winning the third all-team goalie position award. And with that being said, now we're going to mention our honorable mentions, and we have them broken up into their different positions. There wasn't like a first honorable mention and a second honorable mention like we had last year. These were all just honorable mentions who really were in the, really in the running just as a whole for all of these awards. So we're going to start with the offenseman, and we'll begin with James Orbach. So James Orbach played for the Kushner Cobras this year. He's the first Cobra that we are mentioning in this show. And I believe last year that he was on our honorable mentions for the varsity league, because last year Kushner only had a varsity team. So similar case to YLP Hockey and to some of the Hafter guys we mentioned from last year, and also in JV, as we mentioned, that they only had varsity teams last year. Kushner started with a JV team last year, but decided to merge the teams, or not to merge the teams, but decided that certain players that were JV's age decided they wanted to play varsity if given the option, I guess. And James Orbach was one of those guys, and he was huge for them last year on the varsity level. Really got some good experience. Kushner made it to the playoffs against a great TABC team, almost won. Unfortunately, they fell a little short, but great experience there. And then this year, they made it back to the playoffs. And during the regular season, James Orbach absolutely tore it up. He didn't quite tear it up in the playoffs. Kushner did get manhandled by Hank. I believe the score was 7 or 8-1 in the quarters. However, the score really not indicative of the way that game went. I mean, it was a good game for the most part. It was a lot of back and forth. It was really just a couple flurries here and there where it's sort of snowballed and really turned into an avalanche for Hank, where they were able to come in waves and get 2 or 3 goals here, 2 or 3 goals there. And unfortunately, Kushner fell short. However, James Orbach, also just a junior, is going to be a senior next year, and I would certainly love to believe, and will continue to believe, that he's going to be one of the top players in the varsity league next year. We're going to move on to the second of our honorable mentions, and we have 4 offensemen as well as 4 defensemen. I should have clarified that in advance. The second of our honorable mentions on offense is going to Ben Ritter, a name that I mentioned earlier on when I talked about some of the pieces that DRS team this past year had. Ben Ritter was an absolute horse for this team. He brought a little bit of everything. He brought speed. He brought skill. He killed penalties. He played on the power play, and not necessarily as versatile as a lot of the other players that we may have mentioned already or may be mentioning in the future. However, certainly a guy that any team would want to have on their team. The common denominator with him and all of these years just about with the exception of this year, because there was no reason to believe that he, deserved to be any lower down, is that in his 10th and his 11th grade year, he played his way from the third line onto the first. And it wasn't because of injuries. It wasn't because people weren't performing well and they were just, okay, like, come play for us and we'll see if you work. And, by default, he got put on there. He got there because he worked his butt off. And he was absolutely incredible for them this past year. And it really just showed the work ethic the guy put in translated onto the floor, because he ended up with a championship again, and he was absolutely phenomenal and a huge piece for this DRS team. So congratulations to Ben Ritter on getting the honorable mention for the offensive position here in the all teams. We're going to move on to the third name that we have, and that is another TABC Storm member in Shea Fields, a name who we are all quite familiar with, one of the top offensemen in the league. I would say, at least for me, that Shea Fields was certainly a bit more slept on this year because he didn't quite light it up the way he did in his 10th grade year and the way he did even last year. However, it certainly was still noticeable how much of an impact he made on this TABC team. He was an alternate captain for them, played huge minutes for them, scored huge goals for them. And again, I mean, I said Ben Ritter was a horse for DRS when I mentioned him. I mean, the same thing to be made for Shea Fields of TABC. Could do a little bit of everything. He brings speed, he brings skill, plays a power play, play the penalty kill. He can play multiple positions too. He's a versatile guy. And on top of that, this is a guy who doesn't take shifts off ever. Not to say that any of these guys really do, but you probably see it most rarely, or one of the most rarely in his case. And I think that's certainly a huge credit to him, and certainly, he deserved to be at the very least an honorable mention, for these awards. And I think it's fitting that he's on this list. So congratulations to Shea Fields on getting one of these honorable mention awards as well. And that's going to bring us to our final name amongst the offensemen, and that is Yitzy Yudin. Yitzy Yudin, a name that a lot of us, if not all of us, are familiar with as well. And I think that's a common denominator. Just about everyone here, if not almost everyone, knows who all of these guys are in the league watching it. So Yitzy Yudin, a guy who really, really tore it up in his 9th grade year on the score chart. And last year, he still had a very strong regular season. And I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, and if I remember correctly, that he was still one of our first all-team offensemen amongst the JV players. However, this year, his role was quite significant to the team in a different way. And it came in a way that he wasn't exactly scoring goals left and right the way he did in his previous 2 seasons. However, he was more of a physical. And when I say physical, I don't mean dirty, but he let his size and his aggressiveness do more of the work and set the tone rather than try to light it up on the scorecard. And that really sort of balanced out the rest of this DRS team. And that's how guys later on in the mix, like Moshe Aryeh, like Jack Greenbaum, were able to come in and start putting goals up on the board really at will. And really goes without saying that he basically changed his play. He didn't change his will, his fight, and how much he wanted it, the way he played the game mentally. But physically, he changed his play style a little bit, trying to go from shot machine to workhorse, complete workhorse. Not that he didn't have that before, but, he was more 50-50 before. And now that he has sort of changed his play style, I think it fits this DRS team a little bit more going forward. A, B, especially this past year, it fit the team, and it was a huge part of why they won the championship. So congratulations to him, and congratulations to all their honorable mentions on offense. Now for the honorable mentions on defense, and it begins with Jacob Wolf of the Hafter Hawks. Jacob Wolf, who was certainly one of the more underrated players in the league, considering what he could do at the very least. He was close. He's one of these players who I will specify was very close to making it onto one of our 3 all teams. Instead, he ends up with the honorable mention. And really, at least the reason why I believe that happened and why I personally would have to assume it happened is because he did miss some games during the regular season. However, doesn't take away from what he meant to that Hafter team, what he was to that Hafter team, and really just every parts of it, every single part of his game and his ability. He's absolutely outstanding. He has everything that you want in a player. He brings speed, he brings skill, he's intelligent with the ball. He can score as a defenseman. He goes coast to coast, probably more than anyone in the league. And on top of that, he's locked down defensively as well. And again, he was a real leader for that Hafter team and a big part of their success that they had this regular season, a huge piece in that game that they beat DRS, and he played lockdown defense against all 4 of those DRS lines and was able to contribute to the rush offensively and really put DRS on their heels. So with that being said, congratulations to Jacob Wolf on winning an honorable mention award on defense. The next one is going to Kobe Eisenberg of the Kushner Cobras, and similarly to James Orbach, one of the only Kushner players on this awards list. Last year, I believe that he was in the honorable mentions category. I don't remember entirely, but everyone knew going forward, especially the way James Orbach had it last year with that great experience, that Kobe Eisenberg, now a defenseman with a lot of offensive upside and a lot of offense in his game, was on that list, that he was going to be a big part of this year's Kushner team. And similarly, as I mentioned before, they did not really end up where they wanted to be at the end of the season. However, it was still a great season for them. And now, as I've mentioned, you have James Orbach on offense, Kobe Eisenberg on defense. It is going to be very interesting to see, because Kushner right now going into next year, assuming that all these guys play, as is the case with everyone else, but assuming that James Orbach and Kobe Eisenberg play, they have their 1A on offense and their 1A on defense now for who's going to lead the front end and the back end for them going into their senior year, because both these guys are juniors next year. Not next year, excuse me. Both these guys are juniors this year and will be seniors next year. So they'll have a year to run it back, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them. With that being said, the third honorable mention that we have for the defenseman is going to Isaac Marilis of the Hank Hurricanes. This is only the second player we have from Hank on this list. However, it is certainly deserving to him, and a guy who's just off the list for the all teams. And, I think really shows, though, A, how deep this league was, and B, still how talented we're going to have, next year be amongst all of these players. And I would certainly like to believe he could get on this list next year without question. But for what he did this year, this Hank team went 12-2. Many people didn't expect them to win more than 7 or 8 games, and they really shocked the world. They went to the semis, as I mentioned, and although they fall short in the semis, certainly not a disappointing season for them. They had a good mix of 12th graders, 11th graders, and 10th graders, and even a 9th grader here and there who played, not including the goaltending position because they sort of shuffled around there. But with that being said, it was a great season for him, and also could do a little bit of everything. Could play offense, could play defense. He's obviously he's a defensive first guy. Plays on the power play, plays on the penalty kill. Could quarterback a power play. Early in the game, late in the game type guy. He's out there when it matters. He's out there to make everyone around him better, and just a great player. And I'm going to be excited to see what happens with Hank and that team going forward. Moving on to our fourth honorable mention. And our last honorable mention for the defensive position, it's going to Max Borger. Max Borger is a really a one-of-a-kind situation, because Max Borger missed 3 years as opposed to many of the seniors, because he is a senior this year from TABC, missed really just their 9th grade year due to COVID. However, Max missed his 9th grade year due to COVID as well as everyone else did. And then missed his 10th and 11th grade year after tearing his ACL twice. And for him to come back through all of that, be back on the floor, and not just be back on the floor, but be an impact player, work his way all the way back, whether it was through rehab stints or through physical therapy, whatever it was, he grinded it out and he worked his way back, not just to be back on the floor, but to be a huge impact player. He ended up getting one of the captains for TABC this year. And that, I thought, was really just incredible to see how hard he worked for him to get back to that, to that position where he once was. Because if TABC has a healthy Max Borger in 10th grade, for all we know, maybe they win the championship. If TABC has a healthy Max Borger for the entirety of 12th grade, because he did get injured later on in the year, and unfortunately, I don't know that that's exactly what cost them the championship, but you can make the argument. Max Borger is entirely healthy. TABC very possibly wins the championship in his 12th grade. I had the privilege of coaching him in Camp David this past summer. The kid was absolutely lights out. He worked on his game. He did it for the team. Everything he wanted to do, he did for the team. And that's exactly the same thing we saw with him this past season for TABC. it's very unfortunate, not just that he didn't win the championship, but that he had to exit and that he ended up being injured, because that's really, no one ever wants to leave in that last game because they physically can't play anymore. And although that was sad to see, it was a remarkable still work ethic from him being shown, as well as the belief that he had in the team that they can still go far and still accomplish their goals without him. And that, additionally, something I do want to say that I had, inside knowledge about was him not playing didn't mean that he didn't go to practices or that he didn't go to every game, because he went to practices and he went to games when he physically couldn't play, to be there for the rest of his teammates and with the rest of his teammates. And I think that, above all, is really just an absolutely incredible factor there. And I think it's certainly deserving, knowing all of this, especially, that he's on this honorable mentions list. So congratulations to all of our honorable mentions on offense, on defense. And now we're going to mention our honorable mention goalies. So we have 2 honorable mentions for the goalie position. The first one is going to a player who we are quite familiar with, having now won multiple game MVPs in the championship, and that is Daniel Austin. And I said, splitting hairs for the first 3 all-team goalies, splitting hairs saying that even the honorable mentions could have been on there, and could have not just been on there, but could have been the number ones on there. It's certainly the case with Daniel Austin. In 10th grade, won the championship for DRS, won the game MVP. In 11th grade, he split time with Andy Mordowitz, but ended up winning the starting role down the stretch, especially in the playoffs and the semifinals. And although they didn't get it done, they came close. He got a good taste again on the varsity level this time of what it was like to play in these big situation games. And then this year goes and wins the championship. DRS as a team gave up the fewest goals of any team in the league. He was a big reason why. I know I mentioned that defense a lot of times, and not to take away from them, Daniel Austin was a huge piece for them. And when you throw a shutout in the championship before you're about to get surgery on your arm, especially before you're about to get surgery on your arm within the next week or so, really just absolutely incredible effort on his part, certainly fitting that he at least gets a mention. So congratulations to him for making it this far and on an incredible career, multiple championships, as well as the many of his DRS teammates that are, in the senior class with him also have. And the second goaltending position for the honorable mention is going to Amichai Dresner. Amichai Dresner started for TABC this past year, and unfortunately for him, he got injured down the stretch, down late in the season and in the playoffs. And Shai Forgash started pulling the reins, a goaltender you guys are all familiar with, having seen him from last year, and also all season, all down the stretch of this season. If you watch the championship broadcast, you caught him, playing in action there, and he was outstanding. But it would be very, very difficult to look past what Amichai Dresner did for this Storm team this past year, getting them into a position where, should he go down, the next man up could take over in a great position that he helped them get to. And I think it's very tough to overlook something like that when you set your team up for success, even when you're not able to be on the floor physically. And again, tough ending, similar to Max Borger, how he couldn't finish it off playing physically. However, still an incredible career as a whole, played in multiple championships. And, I think that there was a drastic improvement in his game, because a lot of people said that TABC, when he was in 10th grade, was not as good of a team as they really were. Amichai Dresner was sort of the weak spot. And I disagree. I really disagree, especially and they said that going into this year. I heavily disagree with that. He had an opportunity to get better over the years. In his 11th grade year, spent time learning under Chaim Mermelstein, who was the starting goalie, who everyone knew was a phenomenal goaltender, and was. And really picked a lot of it up, because he came back this year and was absolutely locked down. And it really wasn't until he got hurt that it started to show, hey, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. I think maybe it's best if I step out for a game or two, try to fix what I have. The only unfortunate thing about that was that he couldn't come back. And as unfortunate as it is, I think it's certainly fitting that he is still on this list and getting the recognition that he deserves. So congratulations to our 2 honorable mention goalies, in Daniel Austin and Amichai Dresner, as well as everyone else who was in the honorable mentions category before. With that being said, we're going to move on to our breakout players. And yes, you heard me correct, breakout players. We have 2, one for the East, one for the West. We didn't in the JV League because, again, the JV League was much smaller and there weren't conferences. However, we do have 2 conferences in varsity, so we have it. and it also allows us to give another award. So we have our player from the East, and that is Elon Kogel from the Hank Hurricanes. Only the third Hank name on here. However, I think it's fitting he's on there. This is a guy who, similarly to Elia Yitzhaki, has played on the varsity team in all of his years so far, including this year. He's also only a junior. And although he didn't see the same amount of time necessarily that guys like Elia Yitzhaki and Isaac Marilis have, I should have thrown Marilis in there the first time, so I apologize. Really a huge impact player for them. He scored big goals for them up and down the stretch of the regular season and can play anywhere in the lineup. He played a lot of his season with Elia Yitzhaki, but played on the power play, played on the penalty kill. He certainly, I would like to believe, is going to be playing heavy minutes for them next year and will probably be looked at as one of the guys to help lead that team, and really just had a phenomenal season. This is a guy who did get some, he, as I mentioned, in his ninth grade, didn't really get so much time. Last year saw more time, but didn't really put it all together. This year probably saw as much time as he's ever seen in really any of his years playing, and had a phenomenal regular season. And I think that it's fitting that he's on this list. So congratulations, Elon Kogel, on winning the Breakout Player Award from the Eastern Conference. And from the Western Conference, we have Sam Lukashuk from the SAR Sting. This is a guy who was on the varsity team last year, on the JV team the year before, and I think he was a little bit more noticeable 2 years ago, but people really just didn't pay so much recognition to him because SAR was only 2-7-1, and that team really didn't go anywhere. However, last year on the varsity level, but additionally on the varsity level last year, that team was so incredibly stacked and loaded that there really just wasn't a spot for him, because of the fact that they had guys ahead of him like Gabe Hornblast, like Ari Fenster, like Eitan Kraus, like Micah Gazal, guys in the past who we've already named, who were all phenomenal skill players for them. But Sam Lukashuk did not let that discourage him, and he kept his head down, and he put his head down and said, I want to get to being one of the more impact players in this league. I want to prove what I'm worth. And that's really what he did. He ended up filling in a huge spot for SAR on the power play this past year, scored many goals, big goals. For SAR, played a lot with Asher Rudman this past season, and he was a real impact player for this SAR team. And, the breakout for him, although now he's a senior, so unfortunately he won't have anything left to play for, but he graduates, A, having won a championship, B, having worked on his game, C, not just having worked on his game, but especially putting it all together and it translating for him to have been an impact player, not just on SAR, but if you put him on any team in this league, I'm sure every single coach would love to have a guy like Sam Lukashuk on his team with the work ethic he puts in, the skill he brings, but also the leadership that he brings. He was a captain for SAR this past year. Certainly think it's fitting that he ends up on this list and gets the mention. And congratulations to him. Congratulations to Elon Kogel for winning our two breakout player awards from the East and from the West. And with that being said, we're going to move on to our second last award. That's the Mensch/Sportsmanship Award. And for the first time, we have three awards left. The Mensch/Sportsmanship Award, we have Aryeh Simon and Chaim Simon. As I was going to say, for the first time, we have this award being shared as a co-award or co-winners. And before you ask, I'm not sure if they're related. I don't think they are. I could be wrong, so I apologize if that's the case. But Aryeh Simon and Chaim Simon, two guys that have been on this list already. Aryeh Simon from the first all-team defenseman and Chaim Simon from the third all-team offenseman. Nothing bad to say from really about either of these guys, I'm sure, and really of any of these players in the league. But these are the two guys who seem to be on and off the floor, and also obviously, as voted by everyone else, the guys who have best led by example, but have also not just led by example necessarily playing hockey, but doing everything else off the floor, the way that they, have interacted with everyone else, the way they treat people, their meet-out, all of that stuff. And all these kids are great guys, but these two specifically, at least to the panel here of people who voted, really stood out. And, we've heard stories from the past, about both of them. I remember one, Avi Don Berman, if you remember on an earlier episode on the podcast, was talking about how all of the guys on MTA, but especially Chaim Simon, were setting excellent examples there. They were being bentora, being sportsmanlike after the game, during the game. Same thing with Aryeh Simon. From my experience, I coached the kid in Camp David this past summer. He's an absolute mensch. Really just, I remember that just every single time guy wanted to go on the floor. He was always giving fist bumps to kids left and right, on his own team, on the opposing team, going up to the ref saying thank you after the game, all of that stuff. Really just it's tough. It's really tough. I would say that this is probably the toughest award to hand out, just because there are so many incredible kids in this league. However, we did, find a good mix between these two guys. And, I think that these two are two guys who are certainly deserving of that award. With that being said, we're going to mention our MVP. And this has been done in a layout that we have not done before because really other than our final award, which you guys will hear, the MVP is really the end all be all for these players who really put everything that they had into this season and gave it their all. And for the first time, as well as we had the winners for the Mensch/Sportsmanship Award, we actually have co-MVPs this year, which is very, very hard to end up with, but we got here. And with that being said, our first MVP, or I won't say first and second, the first of our co-MVPs is Zevi Herskowitz. Zevi Herskowitz had a season for the ages for Rambam and almost broke the goal record for the league as a whole. I don't remember what the exact record is, but if I remember correctly, his stats, I think he was like 2 or 3 off from breaking it, not just tying it. I think he was within 1 or 2 of tying it, 2 or 3 of breaking it. And really just showed everything he did. And again, similarly in the case where we talked about in the goalies, how if you took them off their team, what their teams would be like. This is really, I think, the biggest no-brainer, especially for these two guys who won MVP, but Zevi Herskowitz especially. If you took Zevi Herskowitz off of Rambam, this team barely scores goals, similar to the way if you took Rami Kessock off Rambam, they don't keep many goals out of their own net. And it's really tough, again, to find that great balance of a guy, who really means that much to his team, but also comparatively speaking to the rest of the league, is still just as impactful if you put him on just about, if not just straight up any other team and every other team. And, to see what would happen if you took him on or off, anything. So I think it's certainly fitting, having coached him for a couple of years at Rambam, certainly know what he brings. Certainly in my opinion, is a fitting candidate for one of the 2 individuals who were nominated for this award. And as I said, very tough to end up with co-MVPs, but congratulations to Zevi Herskowitz on winning one of those MVP awards. And the other MVP award, and really the other co-MVP, along with Zevi Herskowitz, is Joe Catton. Joe Catton was on our awards list last year. I believe he was on either the honorable mentions or the second all-team offenseman. And Joe Catton, everyone knew. I would say more people probably knew about Joe Catton than Zevi Herskowitz coming into the league for what they'd mean to their team. However, Joe Catton really stepped it up a huge notch. And me being at Flatbush in the middle school this year, I stuck around a little bit for watching Varsity and checking them out, and seeing what this kid was able to do up close and personal was absolutely phenomenal. First of all, I think he finished maybe 1 or 2 goals behind Zevi Herskowitz, so that's just a separate thing. He was also right up there, close to tying, if not breaking, the goal record. But, there were games where, unfortunately, just as a whole, first of all, we'll start with the fact that Flatbush didn't make the playoffs, but, any game that they were in, really, Catton pretty much, put the team on his back. He said, boys, just like Asher Rudman the year before, get on my back and I'm going to take you to the promised land. And he had a couple of incredible performances, numerically speaking, goals-wise in certain games. He had a 5-goal game against Hafter. When you score 5 goals on Max Newmark, you did something absolutely incredible. When you score, he had a hat trick against Rami Kessock in a game. When you score a combined 8 goals on arguably the 2 best goalies in the league in back-to-back games, let alone, that, you're in a class that is right at the top, and it's not to say that anyone, who didn't get nominated for the MVP isn't close to that level, because this was so close. It was really, it's also relevant to the season. And this season, it was splitting hairs that put these two guys, in Zevi Herskowitz and Joe Catton, up in the MVP conversation. And so that was why ultimately they both ended up there. However, Joe Catton, back to again, you got 8 goals against arguably the 2 best goalies in the league in back-to-back games. Similarly to just about all the other players we've mentioned, he does everything for the team. He can do everything, can play defense, can play offense. He's a sniper, he's a playmaker, penalty kill, power play, early in the game, late in the game, anytime you need him, he's there. He makes everyone around him better. And other than that, really just also his leadership. He's also a junior. I should have mentioned Zevi Herskowitz is a senior. So, good way to close it out with him winning the co-MVP here. Joe Catton has another year left to do this, but it'll be very interesting to see what happens, because next year's Flatbush varsity team should look very interesting, considering that they were a very solid team last year on the JV level. And now you get, it's not really a breakout, but the level of work ethic that, this guy took his ability to, and really the results that show, or that have shown so far, are incredible. And if this is going to be one of those cases where I'd like to believe it'll be a case where this guy's only going to get better, I can't wait to see what happens next year, because we're going to be in store for one heck of a varsity league. So congratulations to Zevi Herskowitz and Joe Catton on winning the co-MVPs. And with that being said, that brings us to our final award of the show. And that is, of course, the Beitler Award. And again, this is an award that I think is really, really just like none other, for what Rabbi David Beitler best exemplified everywhere, whether it was as a coach, as a mentor. He was a huge piece for Camp David, he ran that league in the 5 towns, the Beitler 5 towns hockey league. As I mentioned on the JV episode, I think that this is really the one that is the most special, at least for me. And I truly believe that, he left a lasting impact, and, we're still obviously very sad he is no longer with us. But this award is in his memory and his honor, and it is really a huge, at least certainly I would like to, speak for myself, thinking that it is truly, it's, other than the fact that it's like none other, it's probably the most meaningful award. And with that being said, the Beitler Award for this year on the varsity level is going to Rabbi Harris. Rabbi Mordechai Harris, the coach for the Hank Hurricanes. Let's just backtrack a couple months. We made the varsity predictions episode, and really not just the varsity predictions episode, but if you want to backtrack a little bit more than a couple months and go back about a year, when we did our end of season recap, we talked about how Hank was going to be a team that was very interesting, because they could probably compete with teams and score goals, but could they keep them out of their net? Could they tighten up defensively? Would they have enough depth, or would they be able to find those pieces they could plug in? And it all starts with the coaching there, because your coaching helps you, it's obviously your, the brains behind the system, it's your guidance for your matchups, as well as your strategies, and also your line combinations, all of that stuff. And Rabbi Harris did a phenomenal job, not just because he took this Hank team and made them better, gave them a better result, because last year they lost in the quarterfinals. This year they lost in the semis. So other than the fact they went farther this year than they did last year, he did it with a team that lost so many pieces. They lost Judah Ehrenhaus. They lost Jordan Gedgerman. They lost Joey Diamond in net. And everyone was saying there is no way they are going to be rebounding, especially from a guy losing, like losing Joey Diamond, who was arguably the best goalie in the league last year. And yeah, they were really able to get past it. They not only improved their regular season record, won a playoff game, they went to the semifinals, and they got production from everyone up and down the lineup. And I think that really all points toward the head of the head of the team and the coach. And that goes to Rabbi Moore. All credit goes to Rabbi Harris there for doing what he did, taking this team that was probably predicted to win around 7, 8, maybe 9 games during the regular season, and they won 12. The only two games they lost were DRS, and they were very close in both of them. And it really just shows what he was able to do. And next year, it's going to be even more interesting to see because they're not losing so many pieces this year. And in the middle school league this past year, Hank was very close to a championship there. They fell in overtime in the semifinals to Halb. And they are going to have a couple of key pieces coming in. And we know that Hank has only had a varsity team the last bunch of years, and they've had younger guys like in 9th and 10th grade making impacts on the varsity level. So, maybe they'll get an extra piece here, an extra piece there. They feel that they can work their way in. As I already mentioned, Elon Kogel, after winning breakout player, is going to be a huge piece for them next year. So is Isaac Marilis after having been an honorable mention amongst the defensemen. And obviously, big piece in Elia Yitzhaki, who is going, I would expect at least, to tear it up on a huge level next year on the varsity stage of things for his 4th consecutive year, which is just not something you can say about a lot of players who have played in Yeshiva League before. So congratulations to Rabbi Harris on winning the Beitler Award. Congratulations to everyone who was nominated for an award. And I want to thank you all again for tuning into this episode of Yeshiva League Pass Face-Off. And again, I would like to thank the Weiselberg Law Firm for sponsoring, reminding everyone that's the Weiselberg Law Firm, everyone. Please choose wisely.